the Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson, and today I'm so excited to welcome back to the show for the first time in a while, Dr. Johanna Strong. Welcome.
Thank you for having me back. It's fantastic to catch up and be back on.
Yes, well, we always have such a good time when we talk, and today's topic is one that I feel like we've discussed on the show before, but kind of intermittently with different guests, and you did a whole series on the podcast probably about 2 years ago on queenship, and that was amazing. So thank you for doing that, and I'm sure people loved it too.
Yeah, I was looking back, moving things off the computer onto the hard drive to kind of free up the computer space without deleting anything. And I came across the series again. I thought, how is it so long ago?
I know.
Happened.
I know. Time moves so quickly. It does seem like it was last year. And then I started thinking about it. I was like, was it 2022? Maybe. I think it was 2022, wasn't it?
Yeah, just feels like ages ago.
But then again, it doesn't, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's when you realize, I think when I sit down, I go, oh, something came out in 2020. Oh, that's so recent. That was 5 years ago. All right. Okay. I just need a minute.
Okay, well, this is going to show my age. That's how I feel about the 90s. I'm always like, the 90s, that was like 10 years ago. I was like, no, that was 30. It makes me
We
feel
had a student who asked one of my colleagues what it was like to live in the late 20th century. She went, no, unaccepted, get out. No.
I would start crying.
No.
No.
Please don't call it that.
Okay, well, we're not talking about the late 20th century today. We're going to talk about the 16th century, aren't we?
It's our favorite, one of our favorite centuries.
Yeah, it's definitely. And of course, you are one of the experts in the field of Mary the First, and that's really what I want to focus on today. And there was the recent show that came out on, I think it was BBC. Was it BBC?
Yeah.
And PBS, correct?
Yes. Yes.
And
Yes,
you had some part in that. Why don't you tell everybody about what your part was?
So for the eagle-eyed among you in the American and Canadian audiences, I just need you to imagine after Lucy Worsley's name is my name, because I think PBS didn't get the memo that I was in the credits, but BBC did, so I'm taking that one. So it would have been probably about a year or more ago. I got an email in my inbox, and I was at work, and it's from one of the producers. I just went, guys. Yes. And I was so excited. And it basically was that the show or the series was wanting to do an episode on Mary. And could I have a chat with them kind of about my research and about how they're wanting to steer the show and kind of what they want to talk about. And it's like, yes, of course, absolutely. I definitely want to talk to you about this. And so it kind of through the planning phases, and then as they were pulling the episode together more officially and formally, it was a few meetings and some emails back and forth about this is my research, this is what we know of her legacy, because they were wanting to focus basically on, does Mary deserve the Bloody Mary moniker? And this will be a spoiler for anyone who hasn't yet seen it, but I think the episode definitively says no, she does not. Or if she does, so do the rest of the Tudors. So it was really exciting to be able to go and tell them kind of this is how it's created over the years, and this is why Mary gets the reputation that she does. And so much of it comes, I think, as you know, and as we've chatted about, so much of that comes from Elizabeth I and her years as queen. And so it was just really neat to have Lucy Worsley's team, like, you're the expert on this. Can you talk to us? And then for someone as kind of famous and out there in a good way as Lucy Worsley is, to have her stand up on BBC and PBS and go, here's the research. Here are these fantastic people who were working on this. Here you go, world. And it was just so nice to see, not on Elizabeth the First series again, and to see kind of Mary in a new way, at least on TV. And I think something that so many of the historians that they interviewed for the episode and recorded those interviews, I think all of them would agree that it's just great to see what we've been saying for years finally hitting kind of the DVD and the TV screens, which is really exciting.
Yeah. I watched it. It was just a couple nights ago that I watched it. I was so excited because I've been watching Wolf Hall now that it's out here. And I saw that came up and I thought, oh my gosh, I need to watch this because I'm going to be talking to you. And it was so good. I felt really giddy while I was watching it because I did feel like, okay, now the true story is out there. And like you said, Lucy has such a big name that when it's somebody like her who is saying these things, it really lands much harder, doesn't it?
Yes. Yeah. And to have, I think, the established Marian historians talking to her about it, but then to also see kind of the up and coming or the new PhDs come in and talk to her as well is so exciting that it's not the same old people doing the same old thing,
Yeah.
that it really is this engagement with new research, which I think so often is, I think frustratingly for some of us feels like it isn't the case. And so it's so exciting then to see that shift. And I think especially when there are kind of other programs who've said, hey, do you want to have a chat? And then they've gone, actually, we're going in a different direction. I think, oh, I know what that means, and I'm not sure I want to watch it then,
Yeah.
because I know exactly why you don't want to talk to me anymore. And so it was so exciting, I think, just to be able to be like, I know them, like that's my friend on TV. And then to be able to go like with the screenshot for the credits, like that's me.
I know. I saw you posted something about how your name wasn't included on PBS, and I looked too. As soon as it came up, I was looking. I'm like, no, it's not. I'm sorry.
Oh, it's okay. So my yeah, I basically was so excited. All of my American and Canadian friends
Yeah.
and family are gonna see this. It's gonna be great. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's okay. I know that I'm in there.
Yes, clearly, they didn't know that you're Canadian. Otherwise, they would have included you.
which which my comment then was, well, maybe with all the budget cuts, PBS can't be seen to be fraternizing too much with Canadians.
Yeah, maybe. Oh my gosh,
So,
that's funny.
yeah.
Watching that, it was, I think, probably the biggest eye opener to me, and I don't know, this might come as a surprise to you, was when she was going through John Fox's Book of Martyrs. And she got all the way to the section about Mary and then showed us how thick that section was compared to. Let's talk about that. For those who don't really understand what that means, let's talk about why.
Yes. So Fox's Acts and Monuments is an easily a 2,000 to 2,500 page book. Easily. Especially when you get it kind of as it's being published and they keep adding to it even after Fox is dead. And so they just keep adding and adding and adding. And so it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But by the time that it's being published in the 1560s, and it has a few editions in the 1560s and then again in the 1580s, and a lot of the stuff from Mary's reign comes kind of around the 1,500 page mark. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm looking at is already so far in. But what Fox essentially did is he decided when Mary was on the throne and he is obviously, in case we haven't guessed, he's very much a not Catholic. And so he tries to avoid Mary's reign as much as possible. And he voluntarily goes into exile and is watching events happen in England without him. And then, of course, when Mary dies, he goes, yes, this is my chance. I can go back to England and I can be not Catholic and it'll be fine. And so then in the 1560s, he starts to put together this martyrology. So it's an account of basically all of the martyrs throughout Christian history. And he originally wanted it to focus on a much broader scope than it actually does. But it focuses on what he claims is Christianity from kind of day zero up to his age. And so it's allegedly 1,500 years of the persecution of Christians. But when he puts Mary, it's kind of a half and half almost, is there's a little bit about everything, pre-1553. And then Mary's section is massive. And he also includes so many images in Mary's section. So the rest of the book has, a handful of woodcuts. So a handful of images showing stories that he's sharing. And then the images that he puts or has put with Mary's section, there are an equal or greater number of woodcuts in Mary's section than there are for the other 1,500 years of Christianity that happened before her. And you just think, Fox, what are you doing? But the problem is then that I think a lot of people historically and today open up Fox and think, oh, well, this must be the story. It was written by someone at the time. They've done their research in kind of air quotes. Surely that's the truth. And you think, well, no, it's his version of the truth. And that doesn't mean that for him it's any less true, but it is one of these things where his focus is so much on the 5 years of Mary's reign, and he's focusing so much on how terrible it was and how this should be a warning to Elizabeth. And basically, this is how we don't do it in England because this is wrong. And for that focus to be so much on Mary is just, I think, astounding to me. But it's such a good resource to get into his head and then to get into the heads of kind of 1560s people reading it to go, well, why would you buy a book like this? And actually, because it fits with what you're learning and what you're feeling and how you're remembering everything.
Yeah. Do you think John Fox is the one who started the ball moving on the Bloody Mary moniker? I don't think he actually used that phrase, but he seems like he was the first one to kind of label her as bad.
Yeah. So we have kind of up until Fox and including Fox, the term bloody is definitely used about her reign and is used about other people. So we often get the stories of Bloody Bonner, who I think he was the Bishop of London. So he's kind of not quite as right hand as Cardinal Pole is, but he is one of the big movers and shakers of Marian religious policy. And so he's often, probably because it's alliterative and because it probably has some basis in fact, like Mary's, that Bloody Bonner is very much shown in Fox and in other works. But I think it is so much down to Fox and to how popular his work is that really sticks in relation to Mary. And what's really interesting in that is that he refers to the bloodiness of her reign. He refers to kind of the bloodiness of her policies. He refers to the bloodiness of her counselors. But if you did like a Control F or a Command F, if you're not on a PC, if you searched through the digitized version, her name actually doesn't come up that much because the focus is on the policy and the people around her. And so in the same breath or in the same kind of quill stroke, Fox is blaming Mary's counselors for it and is blaming her for the poor leadership around her, but then is also kind of writing her out of it and going, well, she didn't do anything. It was everyone around her, and they're all terrible people. And so that's really interesting that, in a sense, this is, or that section of his book, he's all about Mary, but it's not really about Mary at all if you're looking just for her. And I think that's a fascinating bit of it, that he plays such a role. And because Acts and Monuments is ordered in 1571 to be put into every cathedral church, it becomes kind of the official understanding of that history. And so that idea of this bloody reign really becomes, I guess, accepted by the Protestant communities or by those who don't have a vested interest in arguing otherwise. And so he really portrays her as kind of the head of a bloody reign. But it's not until the 1650s that we actually get Bloody Mary used kind of with the two words together, used to refer to Mary herself and not just to her reign or to her counselors or to her policy.
How big of a factor do you think it is? And I feel like I know the answer to this already, but I'm going to ask you, but how big of a factor do you think it is that she was the first queen regnant, and that's why this is being said about her?
Yeah. I think so much of it comes down to just to gender and to expectations placed on her because she is a woman. And so much of that, I think, as well comes from the fact that she does have some precedents. So I would argue, others would argue, that Matilda in the 1140s is equally a queen, but she's not recognized universally in England. And so she doesn't often get put on that ruler of rulers. She's often excluded, even though she probably should be counted. And the other one who often gets discounted is Jane Grey, Jane Dudley, once she gets married, because she, for 12 days, is the Queen of England and is accepted, again, not universally, but is proclaimed queen. And I think what happens with Mary then is she has these examples of previous queens, but because kind of they're run out of the country, they're run out of power for Matilda, and because they are overthrown, to put it in the bluntest of terms, in the case of Jane, Mary, is the first queen regnant to kind of take power and hold power and have it proclaimed and have it consolidated, and has a reign that comes after it that's more than a few days or weeks or months. And one of the problems that she faces is that everyone kind of looks at her and goes, all right, we understand how a monarch works. We understand how a king works, but you're a queen. How does that work? And so what she has to do at the beginning of her reign is she quite publicly and officially has to, in Parliament, basically go, I understand that everything says king. When it says king, can we all just agree it also means queen? And so she very publicly has to say, I could go one of two ways. The first way is to go, well, it says king. I'm not a king. I can do what I want. Or the second way, and the one that she chooses, is to go, I know it says king, but it just means the person who's inherited the throne in their own right. So I will count as a king. And so she has that weird kind of double role, in a sense, that she has to be a king in the sense that it's her crown. She doesn't get it because of who she marries. She gets it because of who she is. But at the same time, she also has to play the role of queen, because when she gets married, Philip can't give birth. Philip can't provide the heirs. Philip can't ask for mercy on her behalf, because that's going to make him look like a weak man according to the expectations of the day. And so she has to navigate this very complex situation of how do you be a king and a queen? How do you represent your own power without, once she's married, making Philip look like he's weak or he doesn't have power or he's the submissive part of the partnership? And I think so much of that comes into why it's such a complex legacy then, because at some points, historians will look at it and go, well, it's really Philip's influence that does X, Y, Z. Really, it's Philip's influence over the church, and that's why he leads the policy. You think, well, yes, but at the same time, for Mary, of course she's going to turn to Philip and go, can you do the church stuff? Because she's a woman. And especially a Catholic woman at the time, and a Catholic woman, as we look back on it, she doesn't have a voice in the official church because it's run by men. And so it's natural for her to then turn and go, well, Philip, you're a man. They'll listen to you. Can you do this? And it's that complexity, I think, of wanting to do things like touch for the king's evil. So basically touching for scrofula, which is a form of tuberculosis, I think, and kind of taking on that role. And historians will say, oh, it's the first time that a queen did it. You think, well, I mean, yes, by definition, yes, but she's just another monarch doing it. She's not the first. She's just the first who happens to have a girl's name while doing it.
Yeah.
And so it's that distinction there of she's, I guess, special in the sense that she is the first crowned queen regnant, but she's not so special in that she's just continuing on this legacy. And I think because of those expectations of, you have to be strong and independent, but you also have to listen to your husband. You have to lead on policy, but also you can't get up in church and say anything. It makes it so hard for her to navigate. And I think makes it so hard kind of for us to navigate even in 2025, because we look back at it and we go, well, what was expected of her? And if she steps too far outside of that, she's, a monster. But if she stays too much in it, she's a terrible queen because she has no power. And I think that really plays a role in how she's remembered. And especially if the throne in 1558, I don't know what happened to Elizabeth, but if she weren't there in 1558 and it had gone to a man, which it probably wouldn't have because none of the possible heirs were men, but had it gone to a man, looking at Mary would have become, I think, a lot more gendered. But because the throne goes to Elizabeth, she's again a queen. She's again a queen in kind of a king's role, in a sense. She's again a woman king. And so authors can't attack Elizabeth for that, and they can't attack Mary for that. And so they have to pick something else that differentiates the two women, and that becomes religion.
Yeah.
And so I think it's kind of that three strikes against Mary, in a sense, that for Elizabeth, the strike against her might be seen that she's a woman, but she doesn't marry, she's strong and independent, and she's Protestant. And for Mary, the three strikes are, she's a woman, she gets married to a Spaniard of all people, and she's Catholic. And it's that marriage and the Catholicism which really get latched onto. And then adding in the fact, oh, and she's a woman who doesn't understand how it works, just makes that a million times worse.
Yeah. Yeah, it must have been so difficult for Mary being the first queen regnant. I mean, I think she always knew, right, that she was meant to be queen, but it must have been so difficult to set that standard, not knowing that there were going to be more queen regnants in the future. How do you think her rule influenced, well, let's start with Elizabeth and then move to Victoria and even Queen Elizabeth II. Do we see any ways that her rule influenced them?
I think what's really interesting is that Mary tries to toe the gendered line as much as possible. She tries to keep it that, well, of course, Philip would be named King of England. He's not crowned as king, but of course, he'd be given that title because he's married to a queen. And if you're married to a queen, you're a king. End of story. And I think what's interesting is, I mean, Elizabeth doesn't marry, so we kind of, she gets out of this for a second. But if we look at Victoria, she marries, and Albert doesn't go by king, even though he's not crowned, even though he's in the same role as Philip is, he doesn't get that title. And we don't see that title of king kind of conferred on Queen Anne's husband. We obviously do see it on her predecessor, William III and Mary II, because they come in together. But for the queens who inherit kind of on their own and in their own right, like Victoria and I guess like Anne, like Victoria, and like Elizabeth II, they marry, and their husband, I guess, has every right, has every expectation that he could be titled King of England, but he isn't. And I think that's, for many reasons, I think beyond just looking at Mary, is significant. And I think what makes Mary different in that is that she does name Philip king, and he signs things as King of England, and it's on the coinage and it's on the seal, and it's so obvious that they are king and queen of England and everywhere else. And I think it's telling that none of the other queens choose to give their husband that same title, because I think they see, or maybe indirectly, they see that when Mary did that, it then becomes, oh, it's a foreign invasion. You know, Philip's in charge of everything. Mary's just there to have the kids. And it becomes this very scary idea that England is being quietly invaded. And so I think that's one of the massive precedents that she sets in a negative way of, well, we're not going to do that because that doesn't go down well. But I think what is really interesting is that when Elizabeth is looking at getting married and is looking at negotiating with foreign powers, she actually takes Mary's marriage treaty and goes, this is what I want to start with. Just, cross out Mary, put my name in. We'll blank out Philip. We'll figure out who we're going to put in there. But she bases her potential marriage treaty and her marriage negotiations on the terms that Mary and Philip agreed to. And I think that's so telling as a positive precedent that Mary obviously negotiated it well enough in the 1550s that Elizabeth and her counselors are looking at it, 10, 20, 30 years later and are going, that's a great example. Let's do that. And I guess in a sense, even though Elizabeth doesn't marry, she is still looking at that precedent and going, all right, given the situation, I think that's the best negotiation that we can do. Let's go from there. So I think that's a big way that Mary influences the other queens who exist in England. I think, as I say, Mary II is a bit of an outlier because she is a co-monarch in the way that none of the other queens are. Or is officially a co-monarch in the way that none of the other queens are. And I think the other big thing that Mary influences is just this idea that a monarch is not synonymous with a king, that a queen, if she is a monarch, can play the same role. And I think that's something that we saw, especially in living memory with Elizabeth II, is that at no point did people go, oh, she shouldn't do that because she's a woman. That was just kind of the standard. And I think she also took that as, I'm a woman and I can do whatever Philip can do, no problem. And I think that became, in a sense, a negotiating point or a point of kind of personal privilege for her, that she isn't special in a sense because she's a queen. She's special because she is the monarch. And I think Mary is the first one who really sets that out and who goes, I'm special because I have a name and a number. I'm not special. Well, she really didn't have a number because they didn't know there would be a Mary the Second, but she's special because of who she is, not of what she is, in a sense. And I think that's the big precedent that she sets, is that it is doable. And it's doable as a woman, and it's doable as a queen. And I think that's the big overarching precedence that she sets for later English and then British queens.
Yeah. How much of an impact do you think that her mother, Catherine of Aragon, and her grandmother, Isabel of Castile, had on her?
So much, just so much. I don't think we can underestimate that, because Catherine of Aragon grows up in Spain looking at her mother and her father as co-rulers, as kind of joint monarchs, unofficially. Officially they are monarchs of different places, but they rule as a team. And so Catherine grows up and kind of goes, well, it's normal for someone to be queen and have as much power because I see it every day. And I think Catherine then is so immersed in that role and so immersed in, yes, she was raised to be a queen consort, but she could still have that power. She could still have that influence, albeit differently from a queen regnant. And so then when Catherine and when Henry don't have surviving sons, but they have Mary, I don't think it's kind of out of the ordinary for Catherine's brain to then go, well, that's fine because, mum did it. So why can't Mary do it? And I think that is such an influence on how Mary is raised then, that she is raised with the idea that she would be a queen consort, that she would get married to some foreign power, she would be a queen elsewhere, because surely, Catherine and Henry would have sons. But I think the way that Catherine raises her and the way that Catherine orders her to be raised is one where she's given the education, she's given the skills, kind of professional and personal, that she can do all of that. And so that step from kind of queen consort into queen regnant isn't as massive a jump as it would be for someone like Queen Jane. It wouldn't be as massive a jump because you're just adding in, one or two things, that she can sign legislation or she can do this. And so I think having that example is so important for Mary's upbringing and for her as a queen to go, actually, this is very normal. And as Sarah Gristwood points out in her book, Game of Queens, that basically most of Europe at this point is either being actively ruled by a woman, either officially, like as a regnant, or as a regent, or as a dowager queen or princess, or whatever the title is. But most of Europe either is being ruled or has recently been ruled by a woman. And so this idea that, maybe it's more unnatural for a man to have power at this time. It's more unusual to see a man on the throne making the official decisions. And I think that also sets the scene that it then is kind of easy and usual for Mary to step into that role. And it's in that same book, and this is a fact I think about way too frequently, but that in the game of chess, it used to be that the king was the most important player. That was the player that had all the power. And it's in, or at least as Gristwood argues it, it's in the 16th century that the queen becomes the most powerful player on the board. And I absolutely love that. I think of it when I look at a chessboard, when I don't look at a chessboard, is a fact that I think of way too often. But of just the king used to be the most powerful. And then someone one day must have been sitting there playing chess and went, Well, that doesn't seem true, does it? And they went, let's change it. All right, new rules. And they changed it to reflect what they were seeing around them. And I think that's what Mary grows up and what she kind of grows into. But it's then also what she leaves as a legacy and as a precedent for Elizabeth and for the other queens.
I love that chess story. Now I feel like I have this little piece of trivia in my head. I love to play chess. I never really thought about the pieces that much, but thank you. That's so cool.
I know it's one of those where you think, I've never really sat down and thought, well, why is this that? Why is this a
Yeah.
bishop? Why does it do this? Why does the knight move weirdly? But the queen, of course, the queen would be powerful.
Yeah, I never
Why
even
not?
thought I never thought twice about it. Obviously play.
Yeah, it's one of those where I think we just sit down and go, all right, so the king can only move one space, and then if he gets cornered, well, that's it. The game's over. He's done. He can't
Yep.
really do anything. You think, well, no, of course the queen can move everywhere. That's just how the rules work. And so to think, oh, there was one day where that wasn't the case just seems so weird.
It does seem weird. Now I want to try playing it the other way. Maybe just rotate the two pieces on the board and well, I'm glad we're talking about chess because this is like a part of Mary's life that we don't talk about enough that she liked to have fun, right? Let's talk about the things that she liked to do for fun because we need to see this other side of her.
Oh yeah. So she, of course, I think we remember her for the religious bits, and she was someone who kind of was very pious, who was a very devout Catholic. But in the same breath, she also loved a good outfit, loved some jewels, loved some fancy clothing. She loved playing cards, she loved gambling, and she liked dancing. And so it's that image. I think we have her as that kind of angry old woman
Yeah.
when actually that's very different from who she probably was for most of her life, or for most of her time in the day. And that I think she works hard and then she plays hard. And so she spends quite a bit of money gambling on cards. She is very generous in a sense of making sure that there is enough money on the table for people to keep playing. Um, but she absolutely loves sitting down to card games. She really enjoys the finer things of clothing and of jewelry. And we see so much of that get passed on to Elizabeth, which I think is also really interesting. Not only kind of officially as, it's the Queen's jewels, of course it's going to go down to the next monarch, but in the sense of, even the coronation robe that Mary wore, that gets reused by Elizabeth.
Mm.
And so I think Mary has this joy of the finer things in life as well. And I know historians have speculated, and I think we speculate this more verbally than we do in articles or in books, but that it is probably so much influenced by the fact that when she's growing up, she doesn't really get to choose how she spends her time, and she doesn't really get to choose what she wears or how new the outfit is or what it's made of. And so when she becomes queen, it's that chance of basically, well, I am the royal wardrobe. I can pick what I want to do. And so we see her kind of wearing the fancy outfits. We see her um, getting jewelry from Philip at their betrothal. We see kind of all of the fancy things. We see her putting quite a bit of money down when she is playing cards. And so we see that kind of she comes out of that life of maybe depravity in the sense of just not having things, and kind of goes very much into the queen, and I can do this, and it's fine because I have the money now. And I think that's one of the things that we so often forget. And I think in that we also forget that she so often is so generous to others, that she is so willing, I think, to go out and to visit the poor, that she wants to go out and wants to give money, not just because I think she feels an obligation to, because it's a Christian act of charity and that's expected of you, but she goes out and she does it as Mary, not as the Queen. And so we have at least one account of her going out kind of in disguise, in a sense, that she's not wearing all the finery. She's, she doesn't have the crown on her head as we might stereotypically imagine. But she goes out and is talking to the poor and is kind of checking that everything's okay with the farmers and with the workers. And I think Peter, who I'm sure your listeners are familiar with at this point, but Peter Steffel, one of the stories that he often kind of regales about Mary is that she was out visiting, and it came up in conversation that, someone hadn't been paid properly by their employer. And of course, they don't realize they're talking to the Queen. And so she goes back, kind of brings the guy in. What are you doing? You need to pay your workers properly. Did you know this? But that she goes and she wants, I guess, the fairness in life. And so we see that, I guess, generosity in a sense, that she could have sat in the palace and done nothing, but that she does go out and she does want to talk to the people. And then at the same time, she does want to kind of turn off the politics in the evening for a little bit. And she wants to play cards with friends. She wants to kind of have dancing and have music. And she wants to have the not necessarily non-political, but the non-work parts of politics happening around her.
Yeah. Gosh, you're just talking about all of that, and it made me think a little bit how in history and, let's say, in film and on TV, how her reign is always perceived as so dark. Like the lighting is dim. You don't see masks or balls or anything like that. It's just the serious reign of Mary the First. She had balls and masks, did she not?
And it would have had so much of the, in a good sense of the word, the opulence of the Catholic rites and rituals in church. It would have had the beautiful vestments for priests. It would have had kind of the gold and silver plates and kind of the hardware that you use at church. It would have had all of that so much of which gets taken away when Elizabeth comes to the throne, and then gets taken away even more as kind of religion changes. And I think we forget that it would have looked opulent in the best sense of that when people went to church, when people engaged with their faith. And I think we so often kind of forget that, there isn't, when someone wakes up on November 17th of 1558, they go, oh, we still have Queen Mary. All right, turn the candles or blow the candles out. We can't have those. It has to be dark in here. All right, shut the windows. We can't have the sun coming in. And then they find out that Mary's dead. And they go, oh, right, well, light the candles, open the windows. Everything's fine. And I think it's that it becomes, in a sense, in film and in TV, it becomes an easy way to represent, well, she's obviously the villain because she's always in the dark and she's always angry and she's always just this really grumpy character who's just sitting in kind of the cold, dark, stormy castle. And you think, well, no, not how it would have been. And it becomes, I think, so easy for directors and producers and whoever else has the say in that on screen to go, right, we need her to be the villain, so make it dark, make it brooding, make it the stereotype. When in fact, she would have worn lots of colorful clothing. She would have had beautiful tapestries up on the walls. She would have had kind of the color and the character that we picture for everyone else when you watch The Tudors, or for everyone else when you watch kind of Wolf Hall or any of the Elizabeth films. And really, it's Elizabeth in those years who is wearing the black and the white to distinguish herself from Mary. And so if Elizabeth in those years is going, I'm going to wear muted tones, I'm going to be very plain, I'm not going to wear as much jewelry, I'm going to be the opposite, that would then imply that if black and white and very little jewelry is the opposite, then Mary must be wearing lots of color, lots of jewelry. Like, she must walk into the room and everyone goes, oh, she's here because everything's shiny and bright now. And I think that just isn't what we see. Because when we see the Elizabeth of the Mary years, we see it from this, oh, poor Elizabeth, she's so persecuted. Which, I mean, fair. She's not treated how I think anyone would want to be treated. But she is kind of the victim of the story, or the focus of the story, and it's her perspective. And so we don't see it from Mary's. And we don't see it from that perspective of, well, actually, your sister is kind of being a pain. She indirectly is a threat to your throne because people keep having rebellions in her name. And so it very much then comes across that, Elizabeth has to be the good one, even if that's maybe not how it would have been officially seen during Mary's reign. But just, I think it becomes so easy for the visual effects to make it dark and damp and brooding, because it gives us such a clear symbol of, we're not on her side. That's the bad one. When actually, everything is always so much more complicated than that.
Yes, far more complicated than that.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the colorful clothing and that stuff, because it reminds me of Kateryn Parr. And of course, we know that Mary knew Kateryn Parr. How much of an influence do you think Kateryn Parr actually had on Mary?
I think that is such a fascinating relationship, because by the time Kateryn is queen, she and Mary are very similar ages, and Mary's old enough. I mean, she's quite a bit older than Elizabeth and Edward, that she doesn't need a mom. She had a mom who's obviously no longer in the picture because of Henry, and she's at an age where she doesn't need someone to be like, have you done your teeth today? Have you changed the herbs and the rushes? She doesn't need someone to kind of go, this is how to live your life. And so I think that relationship is so interesting, because they come at it more as friends. And even though I think Kateryn and Mary are on different sides of the Christian coin, they challenge each other in a good sense, intellectually. And I think they challenge each other that, you can always go further with translation, or you can always push yourself theologically. And it's a way, I think, for Mary to have the adult conversation, in a sense, that she gets to speak to someone who is maybe an equal intellectually, perhaps, and that she gets to spend time with her family, but without serving the family as she would have for Elizabeth. And she, I guess, gets to acknowledge that, yes, this is technically a stepmother, but it's a friend relationship as opposed to a parent-child. And I think they probably would have had such an influence on each other personally, and I think kind of academically and intellectually, because we know, obviously, Kateryn Parr does publish her work and her prayers. She does work on kind of translations and religious thought. And presumably then Mary would be in that same environment. And so it's a chance for both of them to deepen their faith and to be thinking about what their faith means for them. And they get to do that together but separately. And I can't help but think that would have been an influential relationship. That, here is a woman who, in Kateryn Parr, a woman who understood the role she was in for Edward and for Elizabeth as a mother, but then also understood that for Mary, that wasn't the need. And the need was someone kind of to talk to challenge, someone to kind of really bring out the best of Mary's education, and to be able to go, I know that you've been raised by the best. You've had all the best tutors. You've had all of this incredible academic training. So let's use it. And, we're not going to put you in the corner and go, oh, just do embroidery. It's fine.
Yeah.
That's praised. And I think it's praised in a way that I think is unique, or is more unique to Kateryn Parr than perhaps to the other wives recently.
Yeah. Yeah. I love their relationship. And I can't help but feel a little bit for both women too when Kateryn Parr marries Thomas Seymour. Mary is not very happy about that, is she?
No, she sees it very much as a betrayal. I think not necessarily to Mary herself, but, Henry has died relatively recently,
Yeah.
and then Catherine remarries. And Mary sees that as not honoring Henry VIII's memory. And as much as, Henry, the end of his life, was definitely not, number one bachelor, he still is her father, and he still is the king, and he still deserves that respect in Mary's eyes. And so for Catherine to then kind of throw off Henry so soon after his death, and for her to kind of turn around and go, I don't want to be Queen Dowager. I would rather be, Lady Thomas Seymour.
Yeah.
That really for Mary is kind of Catherine publicly rejecting Henry and rejecting the family and rejecting just the niceties of court life, that there is a mourning period and that you don't get remarried right away out of respect for the dead.
Mm-hmm.
And I can completely understand why Kateryn Parr was like, finally, 3 husbands in, and I finally get to choose my own. I can completely understand that. But from Mary's point of view, it is very much, well, he's going to be there in a year. Can't you just wait and show respect to my dead dad? And then we can all move on and be happy in a year. And I think that strains the relationship, because I think, they had been getting along. They had been coexisting at the very least. And then Mary does not react well when Catherine remarries, and I think sees that very much as a slight against the Tudor name and against Henry VIII, who, for all of his shortcomings, is still Mary's father and was still the king. And so Mary thinks still does deserve that respect. And I think there's, in a sense, a way that when Mary goes against Henry's wishes, she doesn't do so kind of in a, you don't get to tell me what to do kind of way, but she challenges him. If we think in the 1530s, when he's pushing her to accept that he's the head of the Church of England, she doesn't say no because she doesn't want to. She says no because she's worried about her soul. And I think there's a difference there, that when Mary challenges Henry, it's not because something else looks better or she thinks it's going to go differently. It's that, God is first, Henry is second. And if he had asked her to do anything else, she would have. And so even though Mary disagrees with Henry and with his actions, she still goes, I know he's the king and I know I have to listen to him, but I have to listen to God more. And I think when she's then looking at Kateryn Parr and Kateryn's making that decision of, do I stay as Queen Dowager or do I get remarried? I think Mary looks at that and goes, he's the king, that he deserves your respect. If there's a rank, it will be God, the monarch, and then Thomas Seymour in this
right.
case.
Yeah.
And I think Mary's then probably frustrated that Kateryn chooses not the monarch, in a sense, even though he's dead.
Yeah. Such a complicated time. I'm curious, have you noticed any difference, let's say, in the correspondence between Mary and Kateryn from the moment she finds out that Kateryn married Thomas?
I wish I could give you a better answer than this. I've not looked tons at the correspondence between them to know enough about that change. But I would guess, and this is kind of a very professional guesstimate. I would think there is probably a change there, that it then goes from, a friend and a friendly stepmother to, well, you're no longer my stepmother because you've chosen to give that up. And I would guess that there is probably a kind of frostiness that comes in when she remarries. But yeah, I don't know. It'd be something interesting to look at, though.
I'm just so intrigued by the fact that Kateryn Parr named her child Mary. Do you think that was an olive branch, or was she not even naming her after Mary? I don't know what to think about that.
I think that's the interesting bit. Is Mary is such a, I mean, especially when England was predominantly Catholic, Mary is such a common name, because who doesn't want to name their child after the Virgin Mary?
Yeah.
What better woman could you pick? But I think it is interesting that that is the name that is chosen, because presumably, as if Kateryn had family named Mary and goes, "Oh, I want to name my daughter after them," if you had a horrible experience with another Mary, be like, maybe we'll do a middle name so they don't have to call her that every day. So I think it is interesting that she does name her Mary, and that I think she, in a sense, wants that connection of, we used to be friends. We used to talk about things. We used to be in a very different place than we are now. And I think that's very telling. Yeah, I'm trying to think who, you may know this, who Kateryn gets as the godparents for little Mary. Do we
Oh,
know?
I I don't know that I've ever come across that. Now I'm gonna have to go through all my Kateryn Parr books to see. I just know
I just made it harder for you.
yeah, I know. I'm like, huh. I just, if anyone, I would think Catherine Willoughby would have been in there somewhere because she seemed to play a pretty important role in Catherine Parr's life. But oh, now you got me.
Yeah.
I'm
I
gonna,
think, yeah. Yeah, because she gets left in the care of Catherine Willoughby, who then, I guess, herself was, or at least the Norfolks generally, like the Duke and Duchess when they were Charles Brampton, etc.
yeah, yeah,
When Anne Boleyn comes on the scene, there is quite a bit of frostiness between the Duchess of
yeah,
Suffolk, who I
yeah.
know is not Catherine, but there's a historical kind of, we support Catherine here. We don't support Anne Boleyn. We don't support this new marriage. We don't support this new
Right.
baby. And yeah, I wonder then, would Kateryn Parr's Mary, had she grown up beyond kind of when she disappears from the records, would she have grown up in a household that goes, we talk nicely about Catherine of Aragon, we talk nicely about Mary, and you just kind of put up with the others? Yeah, that would be interesting. But then again, I think Catherine Willoughby, I think, falls on the other side of the religious spectrum from Mary.
Yeah.
And so then, would there be a difference of opinion there? Like, we don't talk nicely about Mary. Whatever Catherine of Aragon was, fine, but we don't talk about Mary nicely. Yeah. So I don't know.
Gosh,
But
now
yeah,
you,
if we knew the godparents, because so often, if I mean, maybe someone out there does, or if you come across it, because so often for a girl, the godmother gets say in what the child's name is, and kind of
oh,
often you'll see that kind of family come in and kind of give the family names. And so it would be interesting of, is it a Mary on Catherine's side? Is it a Mary on Thomas's side? Or is it Mary the First before she's Mary the First? But that would be interesting to kind of see where this comes from.
there's just so little out there that after Kateryn Parr dies, it's like it's chaos suddenly. Like the Tudor world just goes into chaos because Thomas Seymour is in mourning and he's being reckless, and then all the focus is on him, right?
Yeah, and that's, I think it's such a shame for little Mary, for Mary Seymour, because she, has every right. She is the daughter of a queen dowager. She is the cousin of a king, like, and by extension, then two queens.
Yeah.
Like, she is very much a kind of Tudor baby. Sure, she at least is very much a Seymour baby, and for her to kind of disappear from the record, we don't know. Does she die and that's why she disappears?
Right.
Does she disappear and then lives another 10 years, but just lives under the radar and then dies? Our guess is, well, she disappears, so presumably she's dead.
Right.
But it's like poor little Mary when you think this is the family and these are the connections. And I think that gets, as you say, it's overshadowed by what dad is doing.
Yeah.
And then it's overshadowed by all of the other kind of big changes. And the fact that, I guess at the end of the day, she is a baby when the rest of the Tudor siblings are, at least preteens, if not adults in Mary's case. And so she doesn't grow up in that circle. She isn't at court. We don't get her in other people's perspectives. And I just think it's so sad. It's one where I think I want to know what happened.
Yes.
What happened in her life beyond, well, her mother died giving birth to her, and then her dad went off and made some mistakes and got executed.
That's an understatement.
Yeah.
I just find the whole thing so interesting because it's obvious, and I don't mean to go on a Thomas Seymour tangent, but it's hard not to in this situation. But it seems very obvious to me that Thomas Seymour understood the importance of his daughter's rank because of who her mother was. And he was going to make sure that she got what she deserved in the long run. And so that caused problems too, because they're like, Kateryn Parr married you, so really she's just a baroness.
Yeah. And it is that thing of, and I think it's hard in 2025 maybe to understand it fully, but there is that sense of that's why women don't get remarried, because if your husband dies and he was the king, you are going to be the queen dowager for the rest of your life until you get remarried. And then you just kind of forget that you were once a queen dowager and now you're a baroness. And then everything you get, it doesn't matter that you used to be a queen because you're not anymore. And I think that's the interesting thing, is it is such a choice for Kateryn Parr to go, I could live the rest of my life as a queen dowager. I could get to keep some of the queen's jewels. I could get to keep all of the things that came with being the queen. And in the 1540s, and really until Edward dies, or until she dies, I guess, that there wasn't another queen. There is obviously Anne of Cleves who is still alive. There isn't, though, a queen consort of England because Edward doesn't get married. So for all intents and purposes, she is the queen.
Yeah.
And she then chooses to go, actually, being Thomas Seymour's wife is more important to me. And I will take that jump down to a baroness if that means I get him. And that's just such an interesting choice, I think, and one that other royal women do make. But I think it's one that is so spectacularly obvious for her. You could have had the palaces and the happy life, and you could have had everything except Thomas. But obviously, that relationship was important enough, for better or for worse, for both of them. That was important enough that she went, well, that's fine, I'll give it up.
I'll choose love, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking about Henry VIII's sister, Mary Tudor, when you were just talking, because she was the Dowager Queen of France, who then married the Duke of Suffolk, making her a duchess. But she continued to go as Dowager Queen of France, didn't she?
She did, yeah. She's kind of I guess, an unusual one in that she does keep going by Queen of France. And I know the tomb isn't contemporary, but where she's buried, she is very much remembered as a Queen of France first and a Duchess of Suffolk second. But it's so interesting there that she does get to keep that in a sense.
Do you think that's because she was a princess by birth?
I was going to say, is it maybe because I love it? That would be my sense, because she is royal by birth. And so, of course she's going to marry a king because that's her job as a royal woman. Yeah. And so she hasn't really stepped above her station to become Queen of France. And she hasn't really either then kind of married. She has married below her, but she's not married tons below her because he's a duke. And in the day and age, there are very few of those. And kind of that's, you've king, prince, duke. It's quite a big deal. And I think she probably gets away with it because she is royal and because either way, she would still be ranked a princess because that comes by birth, not by marriage. But yeah, she's a weird one that she gets to keep it. Whereas I guess Kateryn Parr isn't born into royalty and she steps up to be queen. And so in a sense, she's been created this role and it can be uncreated, I guess. Whereas Mary Tudor, Henry's sister, is born into royalty. As much as they might want to try, they can't take that from her.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Johanna, I've had so much fun talking about Mary I and these other women in history. I want to know, is there any last little note you want to leave the listeners with about Mary I that maybe we didn't cover?
Oh my goodness. I think my biggest thing would be just to think critically about it when people are approaching her. I think that's the biggest thing, is so much of the narrative that we get is because England went Protestant and stayed Protestant. So much of the narrative that we get is because England became increasingly kind of focused on itself over the 16th and 17th centuries. And so Mary becomes kind of an outlier, and she comes across as like the weird one who did everything differently. And I think that would be the biggest thing that I would want people to do, is just kind of think it through critically when you see her on film and you're like, hang on a second, that doesn't make sense. Or when kind of there are those moments like, oh, what did she do? Like, actually, she did quite a lot. I think that would be the thing, is I know we do it, and I know many historians do it. but it's, yeah, one of those of kind of just because that's what the kind of broad argument is in the popular imagination doesn't make it true in a sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't thank you enough. You, along with Dr. Peter Steffel, Dr. Linda Porter, Melita Thomas. I don't know, does she have her PhD yet? She's still working on it, right?
Almost.
Okay, good.
I'm so excited for the day when she will also be a doctor.
Yeah, you all have such great research into Mary's life. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're getting to see a fuller picture of who Mary was because of what you guys are doing. So thank you so much, Johanna, for what you've done for Mary. And I've really enjoyed this discussion today. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's always wonderful to chat research and always wonderful to chat with you. I think you were one of the first kind of public engagement that I did starting my PhD. And so you will always have kind of a special place. So it's always fantastic to chat with you.
Oh, thank you so much. And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you love the show and would like to show your support, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty. Over there, you'll get commercial-free episodes, early access, and some patron exclusive content as well. If you would prefer to show your support in another way, head on over to my website, tudorsdynasty.com, and click on the shop to see some of the new merchandise that I have available. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.